All right, welcome everybody. I see the room starting to populate, so let me give it a minute. I'm Jeff Hornstein, the Executive Director of the Economy League. We're the hosts of this discussion this morning. We're very excited to have this very esteemed group of panelists who we'll introduce to you in a bit. But first, I want to introduce someone who made the work that the report that we are featuring in this webinar, the economic impact of pardon reform, possible, and that's the chair of the Lenfest Foundation Board, an esteemed Philadelphian, Dr. Keith Liephardt, who will give us a few words of introduction here, and then we will start. We'll transition to a presentation by the lead author on the report, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion among the panelists and between the audience and the panelists. So that's kind of the drill. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Liephardt.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Jeff, for inviting me to give a few remarks today. As I shared with you a little bit earlier, the work that you're doing and the team is doing around, criminal justice reform, looking at pardons and looking at how we treat people with criminal histories is of utmost importance. And, as I shared, so I met Jerry Lenfest, who is the founding philanthropist of the Lenfest Foundation, who of course became one of our region's greatest philanthropists, him and his wife gave away over $1 billion of their personal wealth. And when I started working with him, this was back in 2008, and our very first project was me serving as an executive on loan from the Lenfest Foundation to the city of Philadelphia to look at reentry. And Jerry at the time was a 75-year-old gentleman who was very progressive, believed that people need second chances, realized that most people commit crimes based on socioeconomic status, that most people need a job, that that this wasn't something that these stigmas didn't have to last forever. And so he empowered me at that time to serve as a liaison between the business community, who he connected me with and he was a leader with, as to be the liaison between the business community as well as the reentry community. And so, out of that work, we funded Back on Track, which was a program that was modeled after Kamala Harris, the district attorney of San Francisco at the time. Our incoming district attorney at the time, Seth Williams, brought to Philadelphia. It has been a great program that gave the district attorneys the ability to not charge at the time when a low-level drug offense came in front of the courts, that you would plead guilty. The district attorney would then say, hey, well, we're not going to charge you right now. You have to complete this program. If you don't complete this program, you will not get this criminal record, right? And that's the type of stuff that was happening on the front ends. The work that you guys are focusing on now is a really tough work of when you have that criminal offense or you have that criminal record, it becomes something that becomes crippling to you throughout your life, and it shouldn't be that way. As I've shared often, and I hope this is something that we can marshal and carry through. I believe that that your criminal record should be akin to your credit report, where for most offenses it drops off in a period of 7 years, and whatever that period is, these shouldn't be a life sentence for a mistake. Things happen, but for the grace of God, I know there's so many times that I could have been that kid with the criminal record and potentially, had to need a pardon, but fortunately that's not me. And it's so important that we continue this work, that, that the work that's happening, that the Lieutenant Governor has been pushing, along with, certain leaders in the state legislature. It is extremely important, as well as the soldiers who are on the ground each day, pushing for criminal justice reform. As a society, we can do better. And on behalf of the Lenfest Foundation, keep up the good work. This is really important. I'm excited for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you so much, Keith, and Dr. Liephardt. Thanks so much for the support of the foundation, having faith in us to do the work. So now what I'd like to do is turn the floor over to our colleague Ellen Spolar. Ellen is her full-time position is as a policy analyst with the North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. She's did phenomenal work for us on this report, using some data that is really kind of cutting edge, and she'll during the Q&A, we can talk more about where we got the data and all that, but it's, and if you haven't read the report, I suggest you do. It's on the Economy League website, www.economyleague.org/pardon impact. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ellen.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, I now live in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I'm actually a native Pittsburgher. I am a very proud graduate of the Pittsburgh Public Schools, so I was very excited to be able to work on something that impacts my home state. Hopefully you all can see this. Just before we begin, I want to go over a few ground rules for our new Zoom culture. Please go ahead and mute your microphone. Also, please take advantage of the question and answer feature to type your questions. For moderators and panelists, we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. And then lastly, we just ask that everyone be respectful of one another. This can be a sensitive topic, but the best discussions happen when everyone is respectful of each other. So let's keep that in mind this afternoon. After my presentation, we're going to hear from these amazing panelists, and I thank you all for being here. We're really lucky that you took time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge the hard work of Secretary Flood and his team at the Board of Pardons. Their cooperation and collaboration made this study possible, so we thank and acknowledge them today. So I'm excited to share the findings of our study. I just want to start off taking a few moments to acknowledge why this report was written. The motivating factor for us is the lives of Pennsylvanians all across the state that deal every day with the collateral consequences of a criminal record. There have been many academic studies and personal stories that detail the many hurdles members of our communities face post-conviction. From housing insecurity to barriers to public assistance to good paying jobs, research has clearly shown over many years that a criminal record follows and impedes individuals' lives far after they meet the terms of their court-ordered sentence. I also want to highlight that this impacts Pennsylvania uniquely, as we have hundreds of thousands of individuals exiting incarceration every year and trying to successfully navigate reentry into our communities. So we looked at means to alleviate these consequences and determined that a deeper examination of executive clemency could help public policy professionals, political leaders, and the public understand the impact an existing tool can have. There are many types of clemency, but we chose to focus on pardons specifically. In the words of our invaluable partners at the Board of Pardons, a pardon allows a job applicant to deny he or she was ever convicted of a crime without worry of any sanction. Pardons are a tool that are often used in the context of individual acts of redemption. Perhaps a person is wrongly convicted and the state is looking to right that wrong. I think that that's the pervasive narrative around pardons, but we wanted to show that pardons can be a powerful economic tool that goes well beyond the criminal conviction itself. As I stated before, pardons give individuals a shot at normal life post-conviction, and they also give them a chance at jobs that may have been well outside their reach with a criminal record. So we centered our study on three main questions. First up, a look at who has taken advantage of pardons historically in Pennsylvania. Next, how pardons have helped Pennsylvanians with criminal records improve their circumstances. And then lastly, given the overlap between criminal records and poverty, we looked at what kind of impact pardons can have on communities as a whole. In addition to the analysis, we developed 3 policy and practice options that position pardons as that no-cost workforce development tool that can allow policymakers and practitioners to expand the impact of pardons across the state. Now on to our historical assessment. The first finding from our analysis is around processing time. Our data included all steps in the application process for individual applicants, allowing us to determine that between 2008 and 2017, the average pardon process took upwards of 3 years from filing to final decision. We actually found that for applicants that received a pardon, it was close to 3.7 years, and for all other dispositions, about 3.2 years time. Next up, over the full 10-year period, we found an average grant rate of 38.2%. The graph here shows that this grant rate has improved in recent years. You can see that peaking at 57% in 2014 and has remained at or above 50% for all applications filed since 2013. We also looked at race as a factor in the pardon process. We had to limit this part of the analysis to 2017. That was the only year in which a sufficient number of applicants indicated their race on their application, so we could rely on that data. We found that pardon grant rates were pretty consistent across racial groups. So we noted that whites filed 3 times the number of pardon applications as minorities. Next up.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt. What was that statistic? That was, did I hear that right?
I believe so.
Whites apply 3 times at the rate of African Americans. Did I hear that?
Yes, 3 times as many. Yes. It's a numerical value, which is a count. Next up, we have an assessment of the pardon's impact in high arrest and low income communities. A quick note here about the data. Pennsylvania is obviously a very large and diverse state. Arrest rates and income levels vary wildly, and therefore communities are affected at varying degrees by shifts in policy around incarceration and around clemency. The analysis that follows focuses on findings regarding 5 counties. They're listed here on the slide that have above average arrest rates and then have below average income levels in certain communities. So our first finding in this section is the rate of granted pardons in high arrest counties falls below the statewide average and below the average of non-high arrest counties. The average rate of granted pardons in the 5 high arrest counties from the previous slide over the 10-year period was 34%, and that's below the 40% rate of non-high arrest counties. Our second finding is born out of an income-based analysis. We examined the rate at which applicants living in communities of 3 different income levels were granted pardons. We found a 30% grant rate in low income zip codes across the state, and then a 40% grant rate in middle and income zip codes, high income zip codes. So next up is our main finding from the model we developed to estimate the economic impact of pardons filed and granted in Pennsylvania over the last 10 years. In the study, we go into detail regarding the mechanisms and assumptions associated with the model, but I wanted to highlight today the 2 studies that made this model possible. The first one is from the Pew Research Institute that found that serving time reduces annual earnings by 40%. And the other is a first of its kind study from the University of Michigan School of Law that found that individuals who obtained expungement on average saw their wages go up 25% versus their pre-expungement trajectory. Great study. Oh, excuse me. We applied these findings to data from the Board of Pardons and from the census to determine that pardons filed and ultimately granted between 2008 and 2018 allowed those applicants to earn an estimated $16 million in additional wages as of December 2019. For us, this finding goes to the heart of why we conducted this study. It demonstrates the value that pardons generate for individual applicants, for communities, and for the state as a whole. So in light of these findings, we developed 3 policy and practice options to possibly expand the impact of these pardons. Option 1 is to increase the number of pardon applicants. So for context, in 2008 alone, nearly 16,000 individuals were released from state prison in Pennsylvania. In the entire 10-year period we analyzed, only 3,951 individuals applied for a pardon. Now, to be clear, not all individuals that were released in 2008 would be eligible for a pardon or do not intend to apply in the future. But I just wanted to demonstrate that pardon applicants still constitute a small fraction of those released from prison every year. There have been recent changes made to the pardon process to make it more straightforward and accessible, but many applicants still retain a lawyer to navigate the complicated process. Our findings show that providing resources to individuals that improve their chances for a compliant application or increasing the capacity of the Board of Pardons to review more applications each year would have a direct economic benefit for communities across Pennsylvania. The next policy option is to increase the share of applications that are granted pardons. Our examination of pardons in low income and high arrest communities show that even a marginal increase in the grant rate could have a meaningful impact. As you see here, we found that residents of low income, high arrest communities, had they received pardons at the statewide rate from 2008 to 2015, estimated earnings could have increased by over $440,000. Our last option is to reduce the pardon processing time. It is well understood that the application is time consuming and that it includes a time heavy investigation for the Board of Pardons. But we did find that even small improvements in the amount of time it takes to grant a pardon can have a big impact. This would allow individuals to start reaping the benefits of a pardon sooner and make it easier for them to earn a better, more sustainable wage quicker. We should note that pardon processing times have improved in recent years. Thank you all so much. I really hope that this study makes clear that there is a direct benefit to individuals, to communities, and to the state as a whole when you expand the use and access to pardons. So I'm going to throw it over to Mahona. Thank you all so much.
Thanks all, and thank you again. I know everybody's very excited to sort of hear from our esteemed panelists who we have now. So if panelists, if you guys could go ahead and unmute yourselves, we're excited to start with this round of questions. Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to start with you. The administration has taken some really, really great steps on reforming the pardons process. Can you talk a little bit about these reforms that you guys have undertaken?
Yeah, well, I started first and foremost by selecting the secretary, and I looked for an individual that could best exemplify our new mission and our new direction and our new mandate. And I really only considered one person, and that was our current secretary, Brandon Flood. Brandon actually served 9 years in state prison for various criminal convictions and went through the pardons process. And who better to demonstrate the power of what a second chance can do? Who better to analyze and figure out, well, what this looks like on the other side? What, you know, this idea of we may know what it looks like on the inside, but what does it look like to the average applicant? And I was elated that he came on board, and time has proven us wise, and in that sense. And we have set out to do a complete retooling of this process, and we've done more just in the first 15 months than in any previous administrations really combined. It was almost an afterthought. And we are in the process of digitizing this process for the first time ever in Pennsylvania, digitizing it. We have dramatically reduced the amount of time it takes to get a pardon. We have radically simplified the pardons process. And we have also made it free. It doesn't cost anything to apply for the first time ever. I was alarmed because I did not realize that initial statistic that whites apply 3 times more than African Americans. That's appalling to me. And that to me is one more action item as far as I'm concerned, hearing that and meeting with stakeholders to start emphasizing this path to a second chance is critical. And it's also about instituting a special marijuana fast track program, which really just kind of spread its wings just yesterday at our last merit review. And our clearing rate of those that apply that get pardons, I would say is in the 80% or higher, based on just the last several ones. So, and also now, if you get 5, 4, and now we've even proposed 3 out of 2 votes during merit review, you actually are excused from even having to travel, because it could be a hardship for some people to miss work or to be able to afford to travel to Harrisburg. So that, because we have found and analyzed the statistics that if you got 5 or 4 votes in a merit review, 99% of the chance you were going to get your pardon. So why bring someone there unless a board member has a specific question of a specific applicant? So in every way, shape, or form, we are reinventing the process from the top down. And it's my hope that it can continue to expand to the point where we attach it to the criminal justice system that incentivizes this idea that you're going to get a second chance. You can rejoin as a fully franchised stakeholder in economic society. And we want that to apply to as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly important changes that you guys have implemented. One follow-up question I have is, obviously the pandemic has sort of derailed a lot of access to some of these services. So can you talk a little bit about the pandemic and why, sort of in light of recovery, et cetera, pardons will play an even more important role?
Well, we've actually been able to, on the pardon side, to really maintain our pace. And as I alluded to, we actually now are proposing to the board to allow, if you got 3-2 votes, that you would actually be excused from coming. And then the votes become much more kind of perfunctory in nature because, you know, barring a few precious few offenses, a lot of these are fairly cut and dry on this. And because it's a 3-2 threshold, and because we are increasingly getting more and more progressive and action oriented, and we also have a governor that supports these initiatives, you know, we hope to clear a record number of cases. We hope to expand it. We will have it digitized. We will have expanded staffing to make this process as quickly as possible and to do it at no direct financial cost and application to those individuals waiving all application fees.
Excellent. I'm going to actually, we got a question from the audience before the panel started that I wanted to direct to you, Lieutenant Governor. Just this morning, the Pennsylvania Bar Association adopted a resolution that calls on the Board of Pardons, the governor, and on you specifically to cease requesting, investigating, or considering juvenile court records in pardons proceedings, except in certain narrowly defined circumstances. Do you have a position on that proposal?
I fully support that, and I've actually mentioned that I would like to see that happen. Your juvenile record is sealed for a reason. It can't be like, well, it's sealed, but not really, or and I think it's a barrier to some people. They think, well, I had a juvenile record. You know, what reference really is a juvenile record if you're 42 years old, or, you know, like this idea that what you did when you were 15 or 16 should have an impact on a decision, you know, in your 30s or 40s, and you're a father or mother, you're a parent. It just kind of, I think it's like this legacy of shame that really isn't germane to the debate on whether a person is deserving of a pardon. If you are out there living your best life, you are a contributing member of society, I see no value in including a juvenile record. And also it just drags down the process too. It's an unnecessary piece of paper in what is largely a paper chase. And if we could streamline that away and make the process shorter, I see that as really a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I want to bump the next question over to Mr. Buford from Partner to Work. We know so much about these collateral consequences that sort of prohibit a lot of people from participating in the workforce. Can you talk a little bit about those challenges and how a pardon in particular can help some people overcome and re-enter the workforce specifically?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. And I want to thank Ellen and the authors of the study for pulling that together. It's really helpful information, and again, helps to make the case we're all working so hard and tirelessly on. So first and foremost, I run Partner for Work, the workforce board here in Greater Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. We're one of 22 workforce boards around the country. I believe some of my workforce board colleagues are on this call as well. A special shout out to my good buddy, Pat Clancy, who runs the Philadelphia Workforce Board. So when it comes to challenges, I came to Commonwealth 2 years ago to run the board here, and I came from Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I ran the workforce board in Milwaukee, and challenges are pretty universal. Where I came from was a pretty high recidivism state, and so fortunately for that, my work there, I had two key connections that I'm hoping to establish here, and I'll come back to the challenges. One was we were part of the Council of State Governments Irish model pilot project. I believe Philadelphia was originally part of it, along with South Florida. And what came out of that around challenges was, we really need to have services aligned, which isn't a surprise to anyone, but we really better have our employer situations really on the established so that folks have a place to go to work and a ways to go to work. The second piece, the Department of Corrections in Wisconsin was really in a partnership with the workforce system, so much in fact that we were given resources to all 11 boards of Wisconsin were given resources by the Department of Corrections to run programs for returning citizens in every part of the state. And so I'm hoping that at some point that's a conversation that we can have here. And I'm sure Lieutenant Governor would love to champion and those conversations, knowing his passion for this topic. So challenges. We all know that the criminal record is the single largest barrier to any kind of employment coming out. I know some cities and states around the country they're actually running their job centers. Here we call them career links. They're running job centers in conjunction with their health corrections. I'd love to see something like that established to deal with pre-release credentialing, so that when they're released, they're walking back into their communities with those skills and credentials, or an ability to obtain other skills to advance with the ones they have, and also to overcome that challenge that we talked about earlier. The other piece I want to really talk about is why pardons are so important in removing felonies and misdemeanor convictions. Is really think about the barriers that you're walking out with. So if with this pardon, you're able to, one, get your occupational licensing to get your career on track, whatever that credentialing needs to be. Second part is dealing with employer biases against certain records and against ex-offenders in general. Third thing is the ability to qualify for student aid. And the fourth is just barriers in life and barriers to upward mobility. And so just imagine on any of us here who we're here today because we've obtained some type of status, whether it's through schooling or work or a combination thereof. And no matter what our hurdles were growing up, we didn't have the anchor of that. And so the pardon in of itself just removes that immediate barrier. So it's I don't really call it a second chance. In some cases, a first chance. This is your first opportunity to into the world of work or start your career advancement to be a real contributing part of society. Those are, there's a lot. I could list 10 challenges easily, but the point is, I think the point of this conversation is how do we alleviate those challenges? And the first task is this pardon strategy.
Absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, but we're facing significant challenges on getting folks back to work in light of the pandemic, especially for returning citizens. How can we help prepare, and can pardons play a role in that?
Is that addressed to me?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Well, one, just the ability to, as I said earlier, to eliminate that is number one. But two, I referenced earlier, as workforce boards and our workforce centers and our career link centers, if it's a way we could better align when someone's returning to a community, they're linked right away into the workforce systems. So that way, their job searches are part and parcel. They are eligible for supportive services. So all those work linkages are set up, and right now there's not a universal system to do that between corrections and the workforce system. So at the state level, it's labor and industry and corrections coming together. The local levels, it's workforce boards working very closely with correction and parole and the entire systems to, again, to make it easier for someone to navigate. It's tough for a person without conviction on their record to navigate these systems in time, especially in a pandemic like this. The other piece, at least in my area in Allegheny County, our business community and labor leaders and education leaders have tasked me and our workforce board to develop a crisis plan. And part of that crisis plan is really looking at three strategies of work. And then how do we connect those special populations to that? One is a direct hire strategy for those who have skills and credentials. How do you match them back to work, to jobs that are already identified and ready to reestablish their base. Second part is really looking at training. How do we modify training short-term, quicker, or virtual where necessary, so that credentialing process is sped up in some cases to meet the demand. And the third one is what kind of support and subsidies can we provide? For instance, the workforce board, we issue what's called on-the-job training grants to employers and contracts to employers where we subsidize a portion of a person's wage. So imagine a systematic way where OJTs are better aligned with our employers, but also transitional jobs and having employment situations up front set up where an individual can walk into that job, perform it for a while, and then hope, in most cases, stick with that employer after a trial period. But the important part is our folks are getting work and they're getting paid while they're learning as well. So those are some of the big pieces I want a better aligned system will do. A couple more quick things. In response to the pandemic, federal and state governments are increasing funding for American Job Centers, which are career links here. A portion of this funding is earmarked for job seekers with criminal records. So that's the start of that coordination I was referencing earlier, but there's a long ways to go still. This also includes funding for scholarships for job training programs, which provide those credentials I mentioned earlier. And job training programs should have a close relationship with those employers that I talked about earlier. So really thinking those systematic labor supply and demand strategies together around this special population.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there have been a lot of undertakings on part of the administration and sort of legal reforms that have taken place recently, whether it's ban the box or clean slate. Ryan, do you mind weighing in a little bit on why pardons are unique in sort of this slate of tools that can help connect people to opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, I think it's already been said, but pardons, I mean, look, clean slate has some problems, right? Like, I mean, law enforcement and judges still can use access to those clean slate materials for nefarious or negative reasons against an individual. As a pardon, they can't use that because you can say that it basically completely strips. It's almost like an expungement in that sort of matter. So that's the benefit of pardons. And I agree with what Keith said earlier today, talking about how important, people aging out of crime, or in particular, how long you've been out, is really important. And pardons is, like, I think, one of the best ways in which you can do that in sort of a mass scale.
Absolutely. And I mean, we threw this to Earl earlier, but do you think that pardons should play a bigger role, especially in light of all the challenges folks will have getting a job after the pandemic and the circumstances that we're living in now?
Yeah, I mean, I believed it had it before the pandemic. It'll happen after the pandemic. I mean, let's be very honest. I think it's really important to remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about scopes of hundreds of thousands of people that have criminal records. And in Pennsylvania, criminal records impact someone, whether it's they were actually convicted or not. That's because everybody's criminal record is available online for everybody to see, and not everybody understands how to actually read a criminal record, right? And how to use that record. So that's really important. It's also really important to note that places like in Philadelphia are high arrest and conviction rate counties, right? Like, a lot of individuals never spend a day in jail and prison for what they're convicted of. So let's think about that. The state says, whatever you did, you don't deserve jail or prison, but yet we're going to continue to lock you out of opportunities for the rest of your life. I mean, it's nonsensical. It also doesn't make sense with regards to just like on monetary issues, right? I mean, one, it costs an average of $42,800 to incarcerate somebody in Pennsylvania. That's one. And guess what? A vast majority of people that do spend time in jail and prison come back to the very neighborhoods in which they live. So we have to think about this long term and what we want our neighborhoods to look like, and to give people real opportunities to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that many folks here have sort of alluded to as well is a criminal record impacts not only the individual with the criminal record, but can expand also to the families and communities in which these people live. So Dr. Nakia Owens, we have here from United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. Can you talk a little bit about how pardons can sort of assist both families and communities and help ease the burden of collateral costs for folks maybe who don't have a criminal record, but who a criminal record impacts?
Right, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So I think that, as many of the panelists have said, have alluded to, it's kind of a no-brainer to understand the impact that, one, criminal records has on an individual, but the collateral damage is pretty significant. It's pretty significant to the children that are involved. It's significant to the family. It's significant, really all around to the economic structure of those communities and the family. And I think that research has suggested, as well as presented, how the collateral damage as far as education goes, you know, the influence of those criminal records, or having an incarcerated parent. When you look at about 1 in 20, you know, one in a classroom of 25 will have an incarcerated parent. I think that when you look at about 80% of the females who are incarcerated have children. You know, they say that, kids, having grown up in foster care myself, you know, have a 2% chance of making it. And then kids that have an incarcerated parents have even a lesser chance of, acquiring that success. I think the collateral damage is pretty significant. And I think that from the lens of philanthropy, we have a unique opportunity to invest in something that, is really a direct and makes a meaningful impact, where those individuals, those returning citizens coming out, have an opportunity to be part of the economy. Most of them, they want to work, they want to be able to contribute to their family, they want to be involved in their kids' lives in a very meaningful and tangible way. And so, through philanthropy, we're able to, to invest in that and to make those opportunities and access and equity, those kinds of things available to the family. So the collateral damage is really, really pretty significant. And so I think that if you at our urban communities, our urban areas, just nationally, and where there's high criminal records and arrest records and incarceration, you'll see how it impacts the education system. I've been a juvenile probation officer. I ran the research unit. I've seen the data and statistics, and it's pretty significant. But we have an opportunity to really change that from a philanthropy lens, and we're doing that really at United Way by investing in expungements, because we need to clean up the records. We're investing in the pardon hubs, where we need to get rid of things that prevent people from having access to opportunity. And then I think, also more importantly, when they come out, we need to be able to give them and, and supply them with employment and jobs, and, and develop relationships with employers who guarantee employment regardless, of the criminal records, by giving them an opportunity to earn a living so that they can care for their families. And so that's what we're doing really at United Way. And that's how we're really, going to really make a dent when it comes to poverty, particularly in many of our communities, especially in the Philadelphia community. We're not going to make a dent in poverty if we don't address pardons, expungements, criminal records, those issues.
You're totally right. Dr. Owens, can you talk a little bit more specifically about what the pardon hubs are, like what the work that United Way is doing in this space around pardons, and then around reentry more broadly, what services you're providing to folks?
Absolutely. So the pardon hubs are basically based in community-based organizations, and our wonderful partner, Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity, is our partner on that. And so we are funding a lawyer at this point. We started off funding the initial work of implementing the pardon hubs, which basically start by helping to clean up the records, and then begins to work with individuals, and they train volunteers and have other staff that are available that work in community-based organizations. It could be a local organization. It could also be a local church community within those neighborhoods that have high criminal records. And oftentimes those are communities of color. And so they train staff, and they also are partnered with law firms across the city. And so one of the things that we invested in is we invested in the beginning and start of those pardon hubs that help to clean up records and then start the pardon process. And then on the other end of it is that we have the chair of our board is partnered with Morgan Lewis, and he's been really, Gordon Cooney, I'd like to just kind of give a shout out to him, because he's been really instrumental in helping us to get the pardon hubs introduced with Morgan Lewis. And so now they are a partner. They kind of pioneered that with us. So we've been able to bring about, 5 other major law firms on board that have adopted the Pardon Hubs in their, as part of their pro bono programs. So that's one of the things that the chair of our board has been instrumental in being a part of. We continue, like I said, to fund the lawyer at Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity, and also to support those Pardon Hubs that operate out of community-based organizations to help clean up records. One of the other things, we're funding approximately 6 organizations that specifically focus on returning citizens. And one of our major partners is Uplift Solutions, and we've been partnering with them for about a couple of years. We've been able to fund them in a way that's put over 500 individuals over the last couple of years through the workforce training program, and it provides a stipend. It also guarantees employment for those individuals that are coming through. So there is not just a training program where they sit for 6 weeks and don't have any resources. We give them resources. We give them transportation pass. We make sure they get a stipend. We also it's guaranteed employment, and so it really has been very, very impactful, because we have a 98% placement and 2% recidivism rate. So it's kind of, we're not in the role of investing in deficit models. We are in the business of investing in models that actually work. And so we are continuing to move our investments. We've, significantly increased our investments to really addressing returning citizens. And then the other piece that we're doing is with one of our couple of our other partners that specifically targets working with women, because if you don't know, a lot of women that go into prison, especially in the Philadelphia area, have approximately, once released, about, if their kids go into DHS custody, they have about 15 months to regain custody of their children before they're put up for adoption. And so we have specific organizations that work pre-release and post-release with those women, so that those women can, obtain their kids in a safe and obviously appropriate way. That's going to be beneficial for the child as well. So we are continuing to expand, to build our investments so that we can really start to impact returning citizens, thus impacting poverty in our communities, particularly those communities of color.
Amazing. It's an incredible breadth of work and some really awesome statistics on how well it's working. And I think you touched on, an aspect of this, which is, this isn't just a government process. This is one in which community organizations and philanthropy have a role to play. And I'm going to throw it to you, Keith, to see if you want to talk at all about what role you think philanthropy has in supporting this pardon process and the reentry process generally.
In many ways, philanthropy has to step up, to get the research out there. This is the reason why, as a foundation, although it wasn't kind of one of our core areas of focus, it was something that we thought was very important. And I'll go back to the life cycle of the Limfest Foundation. We made the decision around 10 years ago that we were going to focus in on kind of youth development and career pathways, and to make sure that young people were able to have support during critical transition, from early education, right, on to the middle school years, and then to the high school years around career pathways. Middle school years, we were focusing on out of school time. Of course, in elementary education, want to make sure kids could read. And so that was kind of our focus. But we were very opportunistic when there was the ability to fund programs that were related to reentry or workforce development, knowing that there weren't many funders that were actually doing that here locally. And so once again, this opportunity to support this work was one that wasn't necessarily on our radar until Toby brought it to my attention and talked about the work that would happen, that would be led by the Economy League. And we said that this is something, a no-brainer for us to support. And so I think, it is important for, foundations and philanthropy to step up, because I think if we don't put the the initial investment in, then the government may be a little bit less ready to step out there.
That's awesome. I mean, that speaks directly to the work that philanthropy can do in partnership with a government process that's already working. I just want to ask all panelists just like a few questions. I know that this is sort of a big time of uncertainty, and the pardon process can also be an uncertain process. Is there any advice you have to folks that are on here that are looking to get engaged in this process, especially now that we are dealing with the pandemic?
Ellen, I don't answer that, but also in the chat room, someone asked about reentrant friendly employers. I think it'd be a really good time to touch on that. There's kind of two schools of thought on that. So one, what we found is, how does it help you for panelists? Hospitality and retail, but really have found a real niche with the quick oil change centers. And so for a variety of reasons. So again, some more coordination with that is really promising. The flip side of that, I personally in my work struggle with employers who getting them to become what we call friendly. What we found though is as a system, the ability to negotiate with employers up front for any kind of articulation of training leads to get into employment. I'll give you a good example. So in our work over the past year with the building trades here in Pittsburgh and the contractors in construction, one of the most forgiving industries, but also hard to get through because there's a lot of, you don't need a driver's license to apply for apprenticeship and things like that. So what we were able to navigate and negotiate with that entire industry, and we're the major funder in this project, is they created a pre-apprenticeship program that they're doing the training for. So the unionized industry is doing the training, and we're the major funder. And the articulation deal we've cut is for anyone who is accepted and graduates from this program, they are guaranteed a placement to either apprenticeship if they qualify, or as a journeyman laborer making $25 an hour or more. The reason that's important, I said earlier, traditionally it's a hard industry to get into, but because of this program that's being developed, and it's not, and I believe our coordinator is is in the audience right now. I believe in the recruitment strategy, a large portion of the class and the graduates are folks that are returning, and so Keita Barnett is on this call. She's coordinates that program and has a really high level of success for the past year. But the beauty of it is the employers are guaranteeing because they believe in what this curriculum, these credentials that are coming out. So it's a combination of relationships, negotiations with employers, the right credentialing, but also a real steadfast approach to getting folks returning into the process and working with whatever port of service partnerships are needed. So it's really an equation of connecting all those pieces, not just one or two things.
Can I also say one thing? You absolutely do not need an attorney to apply for a pardon. I can't tell you how many times I'll see an applicant standing before the board and they'll have an attorney, and I don't know what they're paying them, but they don't need to say anything. In fact, the more we hear from the participant or the petitioner, that I can't ever think of a pardon that was somehow influenced or swayed by an attorney's word. It all comes down to talking to that person. So I want to get in people's minds that it's like, you don't need an attorney. It doesn't cost anything to apply. The only thing you have to lose is your record. And it's not to be intimidated by the process. Right now, our current board's makeup is granting pardons at an unprecedented rate. And that's not dropping standards. That's just acknowledging that it's a critical part of criminal justice reform. It's important both on a moral and now financial, as this study has determined, basis to give people that second chance. And whether it's somebody from a charge when they were 18 or 19, or recently we just voted 5-0 for a physician who grew addicted to pills. And she applied for a pardon, and she now just got a 5-0 vote, and she's going to be able to get her medical license back. She's going to be able to participate, and realizing that you're not going to be cast out. I just can't emphasize enough. Get in the game, apply, and the pandemic has strung some things out a little bit, but at the end of the day, we conducted our business as usual yesterday.
That's amazing to hear, and totally right. I think that sometimes people are intimidated by the process and think they need an additional set of resources. That is not in fact the case. This is trying to be as easy to use as possible. Yeah, that's
You're
so
welcome
important
to
to
use one,
mention.
don't get me wrong, but I have not found one specific instance where it has been helpful in securing a pardon. The most helpful thing is just having the initiative to push through it. And another thing I just want to mention is we have begun doing pardons workshops with our state representatives. So each one of your state representative is now a community hub of sorts, also with resources to how to apply for that pardons as well too. We're the first administration that's ever done that now too. So that's just one more area that you can find help on pardons moving forward. And once it becomes digitized, then it'll be much more accessible.
That's incredibly helpful. I just want to see if any of our other panelists have some sort of information like that. That's awesome for everyone on this panel to hear before we turn it over to the Q&A session we've gotten some great questions from the audience.
I just wanted to also emphasize as well is that if you have questions, regarding pardons, please connect with also Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity, Toby Oxholm. He is an absolutely amazing just human being, but he is, he definitely knows, how to direct individuals. And like I said, as our Lieutenant Governor has stated, you don't need an attorney, to walk through the process, and Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity will help you get the process started. And they also have, like I just mentioned before, partnerships with major law firms where those lawyers actually have taken up many pardons to help you get started. So please, don't go out there paying exorbitant amounts of, resources that you really, probably don't have, or go in debt doing it, when in fact we are, especially in the realm of philanthropy, we're paying for you to get this service and to make sure that the service is accessible to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure that we have some time to address some of the audience questions that are coming in. I know our panelists have done a good job of sort of addressing some of those questions as they come up. We have a question here from Ed Doherty, who says, for those of us for whom this might be their first extended absorption of the issue, can you help us understand where this comes from, and put more simply, who is opposed to this and why? I think he might have been referring to a previous comment. So perhaps we'll turn to a different question. Why are misdemeanor cases being charged as felony cases where prosecutors request time in jail? With individuals not being able to afford private lawyers or being exaggerated, but now this falls to victims to the pardon process, which takes 5 years to even qualify for. So I guess the question here is really about the length of the pardons process. I think our panelists have done a really good job about addressing how we've sort of shortened that time period.
Yeah, and it's going to continue to get shorter and shorter. The first kind of class of our expedited marijuana pardons process took 6 months, and we got them through. And we want everybody to know, like, the fact that this has held up one single Pennsylvania resident's life is a tragedy. And whether it's marijuana or something else of a fairly straightforward nature. And one other thing I want to mention in terms of the community impact, the collateral damage. I can't tell you, one of the main reasons people get pardons is so I can volunteer in my child's school. I have this conviction and I am not allowed to go on field trips, or I can't pass whatever. And it's crazy. It actually drives parents away from their children's educational experience. And that's ridiculous. And we continue to reduce the time it takes. And again, we will be, for the first time ever, digital as well.
It's an amazing improvement, and yeah, anything that makes it easier to access the pardon process is obviously a positive. We've seen that from the report. We actually have a question from the audience here, and I think, Ryan, it's directed towards you. Is there an opportunity for nonprofit organizations who focus on reentry to partner up in order to increase to make a more diverse community navigate the pardon process? Just trying to make sure that, folks who need it in Pennsylvania are getting access to the services without necessarily having to employ an expensive lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. This is what we're doing at the Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity, and we're doing it through a lot of people that are on this call, right? Thank God for the philanthropy that was the ability to continue to move our services. I mean, so you can visit our website at www.pulsephilly.org/pardon specifically and connect with us that way. I think that's really important. I also think it's important to say that the way that Pulse approaches this and has approached expungement or criminal records, we have always worked in the most hardest hit communities by arrests, right? So when we first started doing expungements, we basically looked at the highest arrest rates by zip code and set up shop in those various zip codes, because we don't believe that for legal services that people who don't have access to this shouldn't come downtown to get the service, right? We wanted to go to them. We wanted to bring the services directly into the community that were most impacted. And we firmly believe that with regard to pardons as well, and any other work that we do. So we're looking to expand statewide to help whomever with our expertise, and we're not alone, right? There are lots of legal aid organizations that are working on these issues and have worked on these issues for a long time. And because of their work and laying the foundation, that's where we are today. Some of those organizations are community legal services, LASP, et cetera, really doing really good work around these issues and have been for a long time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. We have a question here directed to the Lieutenant Governor. About the digital process. You talked a lot about the digitizing. Can you remind folks about the timeline for that?
Yeah. When I sat down with Secretary Flood, that was one of our top priorities, is that we want to, you can pay your mortgage, you can register to vote, you can order dinner, I mean, everything online, but you couldn't do that with a pardon in Pennsylvania. And it was very undemocratic. And we approached the legislature, and they allotted a significant amount of funds in order to help digitize that office. And right now it's in the bidding process, where we're getting out there to figure out exactly who's going to be doing it and how that's going to approach. So that is a process that's ongoing. But of course, with the pandemic, that has hampered some of those efforts, unfortunately. But the staff does remain committed to getting that process firmly in place. Hopefully, assuming the things improve with the pandemic, by I would say early first quarter of next year.
That is a question. Oh, go ahead, please.
I just want to reiterate something that you just said, Lieutenant Governor, because I think it's really important. A lot of what we do through the legislative process is really undemocratic, right? We need the ability of individuals, once they've served their time, right? They've paid their price. They need an opportunity, a fair opportunity to succeed in life, because you know who benefits from their success? All of us. We all do. Our cities are better. Our states are better. We're a more healthy society when we try to encourage people to do the right thing. So thank you for saying that.
I sell it to my less progressive colleagues. Like, even if you're not sold on a second chance from kind of like that moral, it's the right, like, do it from an economic standpoint. And this study underpins and provides that rationale. Like, look, if that doesn't move you, what about the economics of it? To your point, like, it makes us a more prosperous society. And it's just one more way to reach people to understand that a second chance makes sense on so many different levels. And now we have conclusive evidence that it does from an economic sense as well now too.
I apologize. I have to sign off. I have another speaking engagement at 2 p.m. So I apologize unless there's any last questions for me.
We're gonna wrap up right now. So
Yeah.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing, amazing conversation. Obviously, we could have
Thank you.
gone on for 2 or 3 hours based on what's going on in the chat room. We're going to endeavor, and Ellen has graciously volunteered to try and answer some of those questions offline, as well as Mahona. I wanted to give a shout out to Mahona, who's the project manager who ran this project for the Economy League. She does amazing work running our civic consulting practice. So we've touched on a lot here. There's so many interconnected systems. That's one of the big takeaways here. Workforce system, employment system, philanthropy, organized labor, obviously the so-called criminal justice system. I personally worked for the Service Employees International Union for the better part of a decade. One of the rare union organizers to make the transition to running a business organization. People were pretty confused about that, but I hope the imprint I'm leaving on the Economy League will be worth it. And I can say this, we represented janitors and other low-wage workers. Every family in the SEIU world has suffered the tremendous collateral damage that Dr. Owens and others have referenced, right? This is not just an individual problem. This is a community, this is a societal problem. And it's so inspiring to see the way that folks are coming together to try and address this problem in a systemic way. So I want to thank Dr. Liepart and the Lenfest Foundation, Dr. Owens United Way for their ability to be nimble and responsive as philanthropists, to Earl Buford for the super creative work you're doing in Pittsburgh, obviously to Ryan Hancock, Toby Oxholm with Pulse for bringing this issue to our attention, and of course, if it wasn't evident to you already, the incredible passion and leadership from the Lieutenant Governor leading this charge from the inside. So there's an inside-outside game here that's incredibly important, and keeping pressure on the system. Having the Lieutenant Governor's back as he tries to do this stuff is really, really important. And I just want to say, this is exactly the Economy League sweet spot. Many of you may not know much about the organization. We're a 111-year-old think and do tank focused on sort of actionable intelligence, convening cross-sector leaders and advancing practical shared solutions. And I think you've seen that here today. So follow us on Twitter, check out our website, www.economyleague.org. And I don't want Farwa to be mad at me if I don't tell you you'll be receiving a short survey. We would love your feedback on this webinar and on other things that we might be doing in the future. So with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. It's 2:02. I've greatly appreciated this conversation, and everybody should have a wonderful afternoon and weekend living the pandemic dream, so to speak. So thank you all in this very strange and trying time for joining us for an hour.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks all.